welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am your host, Jessica, and I am here today with the author of a super fun book, which is a little bit Dungeons and Dragons, a little bit Squid Games and Hunger Games, a little bit Running Man, and it's got a cat in it that talks. So, I mean, all of those things put together, Dungeon Crawler Carl was super fun. Please introduce yourself and tell us about this book.
Hey guys, my name is Matt Dinniman, and thanks for having me. I am the author of Dungeon Crawler Carl, like Jessica just announced. And Dungeon Crawler Carl is a book. It's about a man, just a normal guy who's one day he's sitting at home minding his own business. He's just broken up with his girlfriend, and his cat, his girlfriend's cat, so his ex-girlfriend's cat, jumps out the window and he chases after the cat. And while he's outside, aliens come and they destroy all the structures of Earth. And they basically turn the planet Earth into the set of a reality television show that is watched by aliens all across the galaxy. And Carl, along with his ex-girlfriend's cat, whose name is Princess Donut, have to enter the dungeon and become contestants on this game show. And that's where the story begins. And that's pretty much what it's about. The cat, Princess Donut, quickly gets the ability to speak, and she becomes one of the most popular contestants in the galaxy, and Carl's pretty much along for the ride. And that's Dungeon Crawler Carl.
I mean, that's life with a cat, though, right?
It is. It definitely is.
When you have a cat, whether it's, originally your cat or your partner's cat, the cat usually is the one that decides how your life is going to go. So that was very accurate. And how I would imagine A-Worlds to react to a cat being a contestant in a deadly game show. What is that whole term, save the cat? I mean,
right.
Right? And cats are, I think right now, cats are only rivaled by capybaras on the internet as popular animals.
Have you ever met a capybara? They're pretty awesome.
I'm dying to meet a capybara, but for now, the 3 cats in my house will just have to suffice. But Dungeon Crawler Carl, this was a really fun book. I enjoyed it. It is just the right amount of self-aware, just the right amount of action. And tell me how you came about this concept and where Carl and this whole world came from, because this is actually the first in a series, right?
That's right. There's 6 books out so far. Book 7 should be coming sometime around the end of October if I actually finish it in time. So the concept has been jangling around my head for a long time. I've been a writer for most of my life, but I've never really became a professional writer until this book came out and allowed me to become one. But before I was a writer, I made my living as an artist. If you Google my name, Matt Dinniman Art, you'll see all the stuff I did. But I was pretty much known as a cat artist. I drew pictures of cats. And what I would do was I would go to actual cat shows to sell my cat art. I also have several cats myself. I have 4 cats and 5 dogs and a bunch of fish and a turtle named Tina. But anyway, so I would go to these cat shows and they would have booth. If you've ever seen like a dog show, it's very similar. But cat shows, they would have artists such as myself and vendors set up in the room alongside the cages with the cats. And I would just spend my time just looking at and meeting all these different cool cat breeds. And one time I was at a show and there was a cat that's exactly like Princess Donut. It was a tortoiseshell Persian champion cat. And I was just staring at this cat who just glared at me this whole time with such an air of, princess tortitude that I knew I had to actually write a story about a cat like this sometime. And I wasn't actually originally planning on having her be such a focused main character, but on what's called a pantser, I kind of just make it up as I go along. And she just kind of took over the story. So
I like that you said tortitude because actually that was a word I had in my notes as somebody who has, just for those who do not know and who may not understand cats. So, tortoiseshell cats are cats that are three different colors. They're usually, well, they're black and they're red, but then there's also calicos, which they also have tortitude or calitude. I have a calico that are black, red, and white, or maybe gray. There's different variations,
Hmm.
but according to many, many people's experiences and some possible science of genetics, they are a bit feisty.
Just a little. I had one before that she passed away when she was 19. And then I have one now named Sky who controls the house. And so, yeah.
So back to the story. So Carl, he finds himself in this dungeon. He's deemed dungeon crawler Carl by basically the species as is, and he's just sort of thrown into this world, which is absolutely beyond. I mean, it's absurd. It's a lot of fun though, where he gets his stats, which could be better in certain ways, but then also there are some surprising things about them. And, he meets somebody who's almost like his mentor, Mordecai, who's been through this before and kind of explains to him what the world is like and what to do. And I suppose, in a way, this is kind of where my whole Hunger Games and whatever comes in. It's like you get sponsors. So, depending on how popular you are, you can get boxes of stuff like loot boxes for defeating certain monsters, but then you also want to attract the attention of the watcher. So, I mean, like one thing I want to talk about a little bit is just the language of the book because it's very funny. Like every time there's an achievement or something, it's like, good for you, you're a murderer. I mean, it's just this really funny description of what just happened. Carl faces down a mob, and then it's like, oh man, that goblin's family probably really misses them, but here's some stuff. So, how much fun did you have with that, and where did all of it come from?
Oh, well, I'm having the time of my life writing this series. It's extremely fun, and it, as a writer, allows me a big toolbox with things to play with. I consider myself a horror author. Everything I write is terrible. And when you think about it, if you remove the humor from this story, it's pretty horrific. Most of planet Earth is dead, and they're being thrust basically into, like you said, a Squid Game sort of situation where they have to fight to survive. And I made a deliberate choice to show the readers what the viewers of the television show are seeing also, which is, it's from their point of view, it's hilarious because it's, someone they consider an inferior species going through this really, to them, funny situation where everything around him is completely 100% slapstick. But Carl is taking everything 100% seriously. And that's kind of where that juxtaposition of humor and horror kind of meld each other. And it's fun to write, it's fun to read because it's a book, it's not real life. But at the same time, it's kind of trying to look at how we view social media and all that stuff. And that's kind of the whole point of everything. So it's a very fun, started off as an experiment. And now it's, like I said, it's 6 books in, book 7's coming out. It's probably going to be about 10 books total. So we're just trucking along, having a good time.
I mean, it's true though, reality TV is kind of like a Roman Colosseum. And I think that that's why this whole theme is so endurant, just like with media, is that you watch these things and it is sort of just like one step away from that. It's like these people are
Hmm.
humiliating themselves, but now we have a talking cat, and that's pretty cool. I do also appreciate that you mentioned that everything that you write is a bit horror, and you talk about slapstick because those two really are sort of twins, even if you don't realize it. They both invoke the same sort of reaction from people, whether or not they are aware. They're still hiding their eyes, they're still anticipating what's going to come next.
Hmm.
And you're dreading it, even though you're also watching it for entertainment or reading it for entertainment.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a combination I've always enjoyed, honestly. I mean, I'm a kid of the 80s horror scene, I that's what I grew up on, going to the video store and renting VHS tapes that were much too R-rated for me. Going to the library, I was a military brat, and we'd move at the beginning of the summer, and I wouldn't have any friends, and I'd go to the library, and I would just take home piles and piles and piles of these like horror novels that they should never have allowed me to borrow as a little kid. And like, the turnstiles in libraries, I would literally go through the entire section of horror. And the ones that like take themselves too seriously but still had that punch were the ones that I enjoyed the most. And the same with the movies, though. And I've always liked that style where, someone's taking it seriously. It is a serious story, but at the same time, you, the reader, are having a good time. And then at the same time, you kind of have to examine it yourself and say, wait, this is pretty horrible, but I'm laughing. Does this make me the bad guy? All of that mixed in together makes, I think, for an entertaining read, and it's the sort of stuff I would want to read, so that's what I try to write.
As a fan of Army of Darkness, I appreciate that. But, also, I mean, more recently, Shaun of the Dead is one of my favorite horror movies and also zombie movies because it does manage to give you a gut punch, but it's also funny at the same time. So I do appreciate it. Although I also often say that I think everything, even things that were supposedly written for children in the 70s through early 90s, was horror. You cannot tell me that Goonies was not it light in many, many ways. And Flight of the Navigator was pretty scary. Never Ending Story is really upsetting. So as somebody who grew up with all of those things too, where my parents would go to like they were not the people who would be like, here, just read whatever you want from the library. But, we would come and we would pick out VHSs and they'd be like, oh yeah, I hear that this movie is really good. Meanwhile, what is it like? Secret of Nim had that whole scene where like the rats were being injected, and Nim stands for National Institute of Mental Health anyway. So let's be honest, like I have an affinity for stories like this too, and you really captured it so well. Like this is such a fun read, and I think so many people are gonna love this series.
Well, I hope so, because it was originally self-published in 2020, and now Penguin Random House has the rights to the first 3 books, and the first one is coming out in hardcover on the 27th of August. And I'm pretty excited about it. It's going to be interesting to see how the more normal book reading world, as opposed to those who are going on their way to look for lit RPG books, are going to react to it. So I'm looking forward to it.
The 2 things I want to ask you really quickly is, number one, could you just talk a little bit about what lit RPG is? And also, I'm very, very curious to hear about how self-publishing went to being picked up by PRH.
First, lit RPG, it's a style of writing. People call it a genre. I don't consider it a genre. It stands for literary RPG or literary role-playing game. I think the name's kind of confusing because people hear that and they'll think, oh, is this a choose-your-own-adventure or is it a game? And it's not. They are novels, and most of them are fantasy novels, but they don't have to be fantasy. Some are sci-fi. There's a couple romance ones. There's a few cool Western ones and other ones. And basically, if you've ever seen the most recent Jumanji movies, that's a good example. The characters in the book have stats, like you're playing a game. So they know that they're a level 1 warrior, for example. And in order to defeat the monster, they have to be at least level 10 because that's what the monster is. So they have to go on an adventure and level up. So it's just like you're playing a video game, you see that your character's a low level and you have to grow and get stronger. And sometimes you collect like a sword that adds 4 to your strength. And all those numbers and all that math stuff is usually in most books, fantasy books, is kind of under the hood. You don't see it. But in the lit RPG books, the readers, the characters are all aware of what those numbers are. And there's different styles. Some are super crunchy. Like you'll get like an actual stat sheet of the character. And there'll be pages and pages of spell descriptions and item descriptions. And some people really like that. And other ones, like mine, are a little lighter on the stats. Like you'll get a kind of a flavor of the stats, but it's not super overwhelming. It lends itself to audiobooks a little bit better because listening to someone read a stat sheet for, 20 minutes is no fun. And that's pretty much what lit RPG is. Most of them are self-published, so it's kind of hard to find them in your library system, but there are some. If you go into like places like Amazon or Hoopla or whatever, and you just type lit RPG, you'll see multiple examples pop up. But your other question was, how did I move from basically self-publishing to a big five traditional deal? I've been writing books my whole life. My first book came out way back in 2003, and that was a small press, but it was a traditional press. And that was my first real experience with novel publishing. And then the book after that was the same sort of thing. It was a collection of short stories. It was a small British press. The book after that came out out of some children I didn't write for a while. Then I had a horror novel, also, again, a small horror press. And that was pretty much my only experience publishing with small presses, which basically means, really small print runs. The book comes out, you make $30 if you're lucky. And not very many people read it, but it's a real book. It's out there. And then right around 2015, I wrote a book called Dominion of Blades, and that was a lit RPG, my first lit RPG book. And I decided to self-publish it because right around that time, self-publishing on Amazon was becoming more popular. It was something that was easier to do than it was way back then, and there's kind of a stigma around it for a long time, and it was starting to go away in 2015. So I figured, why not? I'd try it. And I did everything. I did all the typesetting. I got the cover, and I took care of all that myself, and I put it out, and I made more money in the first day the book was out than my entire writing career before that, which wasn't a lot, but it was still, at the time, it was a lot of money. And so I kind of jumped onto the self-publishing. I went full into it. I learned all about how self-publishing works, learned a lot about the community and the ins and outs and like the pros and cons of that business model. And my next several books were self-published. I started writing Dungeon Crawler Carl at the very, very end of 2019, just kind of as fun. And I was working, selling my artwork. And then March of 2020 came, and all the art shows closed down. Amazon stopped accepting shipments of my art, and I had 2 kids entering college at the same time, and I had no money in my bank account. And so I started a Patreon, and then I basically rushed the first Dungeon Crawler Carl into publication, and it came out in October of 2020. And luckily, it didn't really become popular right away, but it took a few months. Once the audiobook came out, that's when it really kind of took off running, because the audiobook is pretty popular and well done. And over the course of the next few years, the book just became more and more popular. And one day I woke up and I found I had sold several 100,000 copies of the series so far. And this is all self-publishing. And usually what happens in the traditional sense is someone writes a book, they find an agent, the agent finds a publisher, and then the publisher picks it up, and then the book is released. But in my case, I did it kind of backwards, whereas as soon as you start selling those sorts of numbers, publishers kind of start to take interest in you. And then I found an agent, and he and I started talking about the idea of maybe moving the book to traditional publishing because it was doing fairly well. And I did not want to give up the audio rights, and I didn't want to give up the ebook rights because they were earning a significant amount of money for me. And I said I'd be happy to do just the print rights. And at this time, it's pretty unusual for someone to sell just the print rights. But after lots of going back and forth, we ended up settling with Ace Berkeley at Penguin Random House, and they were pretty excited about it. And so they purchased for books 1 through 3 just the print rights, and that's where we are today. And so I took the existing paperbacks off the market, and book 1's, like I said, coming out August 27th. And it's kind of a big experiment for all of us, I think, but we'll see how it goes.
That's absolutely awesome and just really interesting. And you're right. I think there's so much different, I don't even want to say necessarily views on self-publishing recently, but just sort of from everything from, I guess, self-publishing to fan fiction, people are starting to take some of those walls down. And like, in general, just being a gamer, a tabletop gamer used to be something you didn't talk about. And now
Right.
it's literally everywhere. You wrote fan fiction, you did it in quiet of your own home, and you never talked about it to anybody. Now it's becoming a thing everywhere. And same thing with self-publishing. And the fact that a lot of those things are becoming legitimized sort of by the back door, being let in through the back door, and then also being given a showcase is just really interesting to me, especially as a librarian, because there is, I suppose, the publishers and media just in general is looking at it and realizing there is a market for things like this. And I think that that's so cool. How would you view some sort of series of this? Would you go animated, or would you prefer live action if that was the question?
I wish I could answer that question, but I'm not allowed to answer that question right now. I have lots of opinions on that. Maybe ask me in like a year of my opinion, and then we'll see how that goes. But I would
Yeah,
very
no,
much like
that's
to. I
fine.
would.
Enough
I'd
said.
very
You don't.
much.
Why don't instead let's talk about then what are some of your favorite media? What do you enjoy that you think, if you would give a read alike or a watch alike to people who are waiting for the next dungeon crawler book, then in that case, how about could you talk about that?
Well, yeah. I mean, and I am a mass consumer of media. I read. I'm always reading at least two books at a time. Like I have a book and I have an audio book. I always watching like 100 series at a time. I just watched the last episode of the newest season of The Boys, which I really enjoyed. It's a pretty hard R. I would actually consider that a good comparison with Dungeon Crawler Carl. A lot of people ask me, should I let my children read this? And I don't. People bring up their like young children and they said, well, we listened in the car, and I'm a little. Uh, if you would let your kids watch The Boys, then sure. But would you let your kid watch The Boys? Probably not. It's 16 and up. But so I'm watching that. I'm watching House of the Dragon. I love reading mysteries, reading westerns. I'm actually rereading Lonesome Dove right now, one of the best books ever written. And I'm listening to a few Lit RPG audiobooks, going through The Wandering Inn right now, which is a very long web serial that's too long for print books, but they have the audio versions out there, and they're like 50-hour long audiobooks narrated by a narrator named Andrea Parsons, who's like really amazing. And it's just super fun and to listen to. And if you ever want to talk about 80s horror, I could talk about that all day, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah, but we only have so much time in
right.
in this interview. I'm always happy to talk about 80s horror. Yeah.
But I mean, I'm always happy to talk to library people because I wouldn't have survived my childhood without the library. Like I said, I would go in and the librarian in Fort Devens, Massachusetts, she took pity on me and allowed me to, I can't remember what the limit was. It was like 10 books or something. And she allowed me to get 20 at a time. And I would go through and read them all from Monday to Monday because I had no friends. And I would just tear through paperbacks, and I would read horror, and then I'd read westerns, and then I started moving to mysteries, and I started moving to Tom Clancy books when I was like a little kid, which is mind-boggling. And then I started trying romance, and I didn't like that so much. And then I just read all I could, and I think that's one of the most important parts of any artist is to consume as much of what they're trying to do as possible.
This was super, super fun. Your book was super, super fun. And I really cannot wait to see what comes next from you. So before we go, real quick, what are your cats' names and all of your pets' names? Because now that I
Okay.
know that you have a menagerie at your house, I must know who every single one of them are.
Okay, so I have Tika, who's the cats are all like adopted cats that came out from random places. There's Tika, who's a tabby cat. There's Sky, who is the tortie. There's Clara, and there's Sephora, who are mostly my son's cats. And they're both gentle little girls. But Sky, the tortie, is the psycho. For dogs, I have a Maltese named Chanel, who's in charge. A little silky terrier named Penny, who wants to be in charge. I have a fawn pug named Toby, who's just a fat little loaf. Then a black pug named Poppy, who's a psycho little bug. And then there's Freddie the Labrador, who's an elderly Labrador who's 110 pounds and is just happy with everything every day. And then in addition, those are the dogs. And then I have Tina, who's a red-eared slider turtle. She's about 12 years old and she's immortal. And I have a freshwater tank that is always has at least 20 fish at any given time.
But no capybaras yet.
No capybara. I would love a capybara.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This was awesome. Matt Dinniman, I am really looking forward to more of your career. So once again, this was Jessica with Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. Read Dungeon Crawler Carl. Check out the whole series. Take some inspiration because you had a really twisty ride to Big Five publishing and found some success self-publishing. That is just absolutely amazing. So we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.